morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC. We're the producers of the HRO Today Forum and events held around the world, and we're the managers of the HRO Today Association. Talent acquisition is the burning platform everywhere around the world. Everyone is talking about talent acquisition. And most of what we talk about when we talk about talent acquisition and we get case studies is that enterprise market, the global 5,000, the largest companies, and what their issues are. But there's a whole other market that is the small and medium-sized enterprise. There are more than 30,000 companies that operate in 10 countries, and most of them have less than 5,000 employees. So there is a robust need in the middle market as they're competing for the very same talent that the enterprise companies are. What does that middle market expect and what should they expect from their talent acquisition partners? We have a great guest with us today. Felix Mitchell is the CEO and managing director of Instant Impact. Instant Impact is a bit of an upstart. They are a relatively new RPO firm that's just come into the market within the last decade and is a rapidly growing member of the RPO community and recently was on our HRO Today middle market list as one of the best providers of RPO services. So they're not only in the middle market, they're very good at it. Felix, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Elliot. It's a real pleasure.
Felix, anything about Instant Impact that you want to sort of mention to the audience before we get started talking about great expectations?
I think you hit the nail on the head before when you spoke about the middle market. It's really what we're passionate about at Instant Impact. It's the dent that we're looking to have on the industry. The vast majority of people in the markets that we serve are employed in smaller organizations, and yet so underserved by the broader RPO and talent solutions space. So we are on a very exciting journey, as you said, relatively early in that process, but we're really looking to take some of those really exciting fundamentals of a sophisticated and mature talent acquisition function, and we're really looking to put it to work in favor of smaller and mid-sized businesses who are competing against much better known, much better resourced competitors for that same talent, and yet have so much to offer. It's a really exciting time, as I hope we're going to get onto later today.
Let's talk a little bit about, as I jokingly referred to, great expectations. But nonetheless, when we think about the mid-market, they actually don't have the same breadth and choice of service providers as the enterprise market. Everyone's chasing the big deals. But traditionally, what do the mid-market companies expect from, whether it's the providers? Let's talk about talent acquisition function. What do they look at the TA function as? And what do they expect from the TA function right now? And we'll talk about how you think it should change. But right now, what do they expect and what do they want?
It's really interesting, and it's something that we are sort of hyper aware of at the moment, which is that in smaller businesses, there are just such low expectations of what talent acquisition should bring to an organization. Now, I think as a result, it's become, in our opinion, one of the most under-resourced functions in SMEs. I think on average, we're looking at 0.6% of total headcount being where there is an in-house function or an outsourced function as we provide for our clients. It's generally around, 0.6 to 0.7, which when you think about talent being the lifeblood of an organization really isn't much of an investment at all. Because they're under-resourced and because there are low expectations, those sort of functions tend to be pretty administrative. I think if we're going to paint the typical picture of what a corporate recruiting function looks like, it's generally a couple of junior to mid-level executives who are really focused on the reactive job of filling roles. We're talking the very basics, posting jobs on job boards, screening applications, doing a little bit of resourcing and headhunting, but really not being able to take much time to think strategically, certainly not having a sophisticated understanding of broader business context. And for me, I think the piece where this really hits home is what's happening to candidate experience at the moment. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I don't think it's ever been at this level at the moment. I just think the candidate experience has really suffered from that. You're getting lazy automations. You're getting emails on applications saying, if you don't hear from us, consider yourself rejected from the role. It's really shocking, and it's got us quite concerned. And that's, well, we're going to get onto what expectations should be. So I won't overtalk.
It is interesting, and you talk about the talent acquisition function as being more administrative, right? Post jobs, screen returns, book interviews, right? It sounds like part of what is broken, and certainly it's something that TA aspires to in larger companies and should aspire to on the provider side, is to be tied into the business outcomes. Do you see that even entering the thought process when you talk to the heads of HR? Are they just so overwhelmed by the volume of what they need to do in midsize and smaller firms that they don't have time to think about the context of our recruiting needs to tie into our business outcomes? If we want to grow or release new product, we need to fill these jobs. Are they not connecting the impact of open jobs on the business?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think looking at the wider context, I think that the challenge of establishing ROI and sort of commerciality to people strategies more generally is something that a lot of HR functions struggle with, certainly in the small mid-sized businesses that we serve. But, I see it even in enterprise organizations. It's definitely true for talent acquisition as well. I think where HR and TA leaders do look at the ROI to those sort of strategies, they're looking at the very surface level, right? So they're looking at saving agency cost, for example. They're looking at the benefit of reducing agency fees through, setting up a PSL or delivering direct hires. But I think it's really interesting because it doesn't get to the meat of what's really interesting there. So I think the next level of sophistication from that could be looking at, what's the cost of an unfilled seat? So that's really easy in some roles, and we do that with our clients right at the beginning of the partnership, is helping to understand the value and cost of an unfilled seat. So it's more straightforward for sales and billable roles. That's always easiest because there's an actual number applied to them, but there are ways to work that back across the whole organization. If you layer on, that next level of sophistication, you look at the value of creating talent dense organizations. So what's the difference to law firm A of their highest performing partner, let's say they're in the top 10% of the industry, versus law firm B, whose highest performing partner is in the top 30%? What difference does that have on company performance? Because it's not just going to be that 10% to 30%. It's going to be exacerbated and sort of echoed around the organization. Those high performers really have an impact far beyond their individual performance. So that's really, really interesting. I think to the core of that is just taking that time to think about a measure for your quality of hire and tracking that through the organization over a longer period of time. That's what it's a big thing we really need to do to hammer home the value of our function and of our craft.
So let's talk about what people should expect. You aspire to provide a better quality of service, but when a potential client out there in our listening audience is about to engage with an RPO firm, or let's say a deal where there's 500 hires, and they're a mid-sized firm, what should they expect their partners to be able to do for them that hasn't been part of that historical model?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you really want to be looking for is for companies that are willing to pin their colors to their mast on that ROI, on understanding that business strategy, turning that into a talent strategy, and then turning that into sort of measurable outcomes. So I think that's kind of the hallmark of the suppliers or even the team that you want to build. You want people that think in that way. The second thing is, I really think that you want to be looking for people who see filling roles quickly and effectively with a great candidate experience. They sort of want to be seeing that as table stakes, right? That's something that should be seen as a foregone conclusion because of the quality of supplier that you're engaging with and because of the quality of their team that's going to be delivering the role. So at the core of what you're doing, that's the most important thing to deliver. But moving beyond that is where you get the really transformative value. So what I'd be looking for in a supplier is for companies that are sort of obsessed about redefining value and adding value at every single stage of the process. So being data driven in the way that they look at talent. I mean, there's some incredible technology out there. Some companies are building their own, some companies are using sort of off the shelf technology, but you should be able to use talent data and talent insights as a sort of lens to understand your company. So understand where you sit compared to your competitors when it comes to attracting talent, what motivates that talent, how skills are changing within your organization, and using that as a way both to position the talent function and the talent campaigns, but also to add value to the board, to the business strategy as well in sort of understanding what's going on. I'd be looking for teams that see recruitment as one of the ways that you can deliver big company objectives. And it goes back to that sort of understanding the broader business strategy as well. So if you've got a talent acquisition function or an RPO that really understands your big company objectives, they'll be able, or they should be able, to use the recruitment, the bringing in of new talent as a way to help you hit those big companies' objectives. So let's just as a really easy example, let's say you're an electric battery manufacturer, right? There are going to be 15, 20 big car manufacturing partnerships in the world that would really change the game. Now, I think a sort of reactive TA function would look at that as a sales team problem or a partnerships team problem. But if you're really thinking far in the future, you really understand the business strategy, you could see that as a problem that you could help with, right? So supplying market intelligence from candidates that you speak with, or even suggesting to the business leadership that you could bring in some experts on temporary contracts to build those relationships. So you can see there how sort of understanding the mid-long-term strategy can unlock value that you can provide the organization that are sort of beyond just taking instruction for the organization.
Sorry to break in, but let me ask you this. Most of the RPO firms claim they do what you just described. They bring in, they have technology, they have insights, they have packages, they can take your historical data. Do you find that that's really, and I'm not saying that they're untoward, but that even though that's what many are claiming, that it's just not effectively done? I mean, because we hear about all these different technology and talent products, but do you find that when you sort of arrive, that the clients really don't expect that's going to be useful to them?
Oh, no, I think generally speaking, so I'll start with the client's point. I think generally speaking, the companies that we work with are really excited about the technology that's on offer. And I think it's really important here to just emphasize 80% of the companies that we're working with have never worked with an RPO or a talent solutions business before, right? So their norm is that team that I described earlier in the podcast of a pretty junior, under-resourced in-house function, or maybe just working with agencies. So I think in those cases, for the small mid-size organizations that we specialize in, it's really not a comparator to the sort of largest suppliers in our space. That said, I think where those companies haven't been able to effectively step down in terms of scale, I think often the talent solutions that they provide are not flexible enough for the small mid-size market that we serve. That's certainly the feedback that we've had with companies that have ended up working with us, apart from one of their competitors, is that it makes a really big difference that we've built our solutions for the mid-market rather than an enterprise solution stepping down, because it just feels like a sort of square peg, round hole situation.
Mm-hmm. And most of those smaller firms that have never worked with an RPO firm, they still outsource their recruiting. They just do it in a very sloppy way. They try to do it themselves, and then when that fails, they wind up paying, agency fees. And those agency fees are typically greater than the cost of actually engaging with a single partner.
That's absolutely right. And I think the problem with agencies, and look, we actually absolutely believe that agencies have a place in a high quality talent acquisition strategy. But when they're overused, it means that too much of your recruitment is out of your control and is overly transactional. And I think for a lot of the kind of talent acquisition strategies that we find, really return sort of long-term value. They're exactly that. They're long-term strategies. They're not filling a role tomorrow. They're solving a talent challenge in the mid to long term.
And these challenges will continue. We're pretty much out of time here, Felix. It sort of flew by because you made some really interesting points. To our listeners, clearly, if you're in a small or mid-sized firm, you may be thinking there is no providers out there that can help you, but actually there are, and there are some very good ones, and you should expect them to come in with better tools, better technology, more sophisticated approaches. And the real goal is to be able to support the business objectives with your hiring plans. This is the mission of Instant Impact and some of their competitors, but there are good programs out there. And it will allow the talent acquisition function internally to achieve more than you might with the resources that are available through the standard way that HR gets handled in small and mid-sized enterprises. So think about that I would say go from great expectations to greater expectations for your partnerships. I want to thank Felix Mitchell. Felix, great podcast. We'll have to do this again at some point and continue to get your insights. But thank you for taking part in the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Elliot. It was great fun.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone who listened. And we will be back to this topic. This is Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of HRO Today. And we look forward to you joining us on the next HRO Today educational podcast.